to Unsilenced. My name is Shelby Smith. I'm here this evening with Abby.
So I'm Abby. I'm from Central Florida originally, which is where I got my VCUGs done, and I'm 24 years old. Trying to figure out how we're going to go forward from here with all the effects from this test. So I do have all of my medical records, but it has been months since I've gone through them because I get a little bit heated when I go through them. But I was 5 to 6, and I had 4 to 5 VCUGs. I don't remember the exact number, but it was at least 4, possibly 5. I was very, very sick at the time when several of them were performed. I don't really remember the first few, but I did not actually have VUR. The VCUGs did not actually diagnose me. I had 4 to 5 of them, and none of them diagnosed me with the issue. They actually had to do exploratory surgery. It was actually an ectopic ureter, which is basically where you have an extra ureter from your kidneys to your bladder, which was never found in the VCUGs. And again, it took literal exploratory surgery. And the reason that I was sent in it for the VCUGs originally is because I was obviously potty trained by that point and had started school. I was still having to wear pull-ups because I basically couldn't stop peeing. Like, I would pee and then urine would continue dripping for hours afterwards. And my mom took me to the doctor and was like, this is not my kid. She is smart. She is telling me she can't help it. She's potty trained. There's no issues here. Something is wrong with her. And that's why I was originally sent in for that. They were hoping that the VCUG would diagnose the issue. And it didn't.
Wow. Yeah, that is a very interesting story and one that I relate to quite strongly. Being another girl who didn't have VUR, I feel like we don't meet a ton of people who didn't have this. So definitely very enlightening hearing your story and your side of things and just how your family navigated that hurdle. The VCUGs, or just like the experience itself, that's obviously super terrifying for a child. Any sort of emergency medical stuff is very scary. Do you think that these procedures affected your childhood at all?
100%. 100% they did. I guess to go a little more in depth on the reason, I was having this constant urination issue, but what was also happening was I would get frequent UTIs, which would basically back up into my kidneys. That would be a better explanation of why they wanted to do the VCGs. They thought VUR was causing the backup of the infected urine into my kidneys, and the kidney infections almost killed me multiple times. I was actually rushed to the hospital with a high fever at one point. We went to the pediatrician and he said, you need to take her to the hospital right now. And by the time we got to the hospital, we were told by the doctors that if we had waited a few more hours, that I possibly would have died. I actually have little marks on my front teeth from how high the fevers got. They can actually affect the enamel on your teeth. It is wild. And I would like to go a little bit in depth about my memory and my experience of the test, because that'll tell you a lot about how it affected my childhood. I don't really remember the first 2 that were done. The third, if there were 5, then the third, I don't really remember. The last 2 I do remember. So the second to last one that I have vague recollections of, but basically when they went to perform it, it was obviously very painful. I had signs of VUR, but that wasn't causing all the issues, and they knew that. But they basically were like, well, we'll kind of band-aid it and see if that helps. When they went to do the second to last one, they ended up using this thing called deflux, which is DEFLUX, I believe.
Yeah.
It is a material that they inject. So for point of reference, and I will go into a little bit of graphic detail here, basically after they perform the VCUG, while I'm fully awake with no anesthesia, no lidocaine, nothing topical, nothing to help numb the pain, they stuck needles into my canal and basically made the opening smaller to basically, in theory, stop the urine from backing up into my kidneys. It is a common thing to do. However, I believe it was done improperly in my case for some crazy reason. After they did this test, which is already painful enough, and then literally stuck needles and injected me while I was fully awake and being held on the table, I was, according to the doctor's notes, showing signs of anxiety about it. We think I was so feverish during the first few and so sick that I don't really remember them. After what happened in the second to last one, and remembering it so well and remembering the pain, my mom had talked to the doctors. Again, remember that your parents are not allowed in the room with you. They
Yes.
don't know what's happening. They only know what the doctor informs them. So she knew that I was showing some anxiety about the procedure. She and I talked about it, and she said to the doctor, well, that was referring me, maybe is there a possibility of some kind of sedation or something that we can do to help with her anxiety? They said, of course there is. We have this couple of options, whatever. And they did talk to me about it. I was aware that it was going to happen, the procedure, but also the sedation. But keep in mind that one, this was not properly explained to my parents. And two, my mom talked to me because she was always very open with me about things, but obviously a 5 or 6-year-old cannot give consent. Do not blame my mom for that. She was absolutely doing the best that she could with the knowledge that she had. But it is worth noting that my mom's fears were eased because the referring doctor was very encouraging about it, and because I was like, if it'll make it easier, I'll try it. So I went in for the final one, and I'm going to go into graphic detail again, but I was sitting in the waiting room with my mom and grandmother, and they gave me, it was a syringe, and they put it into a little Gatorade, and they said, drink it down. And I knew that it was going to make me feel weird. I was okay with that, as okay as a 5 or 6-year-old can be. And I remember sitting in the room, and I was watching these kids play with the toys that were in there. I really wanted to go play with them and like play with whatever the toys that they had. And I started feeling so woozy and dizzy. The room was spinning. I felt like I was doing this. After a while, it had taken effect. I'm very dizzy, very drowsy. I don't really know where I am. They called my name back. My mom took me back. And of course, by this point, I really can't even stand on my own. So she helped to undress me and put me in the gown that the hospital provides. And then she was asked to leave the room. I'm naked with a small gown on.
Yeah.
My parent has been told to leave the room, which is what pretty much all of us have experienced, in a room full of doctors, nurses, and techs who I don't know. So as I was walking from the bathroom to the table with help, I remember this rush of adrenaline, and I was fully awake. It was as if I had not been given any sedation. I was 100% aware of what's happening. I had such severe anxiety because I remember how bad it hurt. I was put on the table, frog leg position, standard, that we all have had done. The nurses and techs holding me down, and they went to clean the area, which is what they always do, of course. Even that, it felt abrasive and rough. They clean it very roughly from my memories and from experiences that I've heard from other people. And already that was uncomfortable. And you got to think, most of us have UTIs at the time of this, or we're recovering from UTIs. They went to insert the catheter, and I was a good kid. I had my moments, but I really was a people pleaser. I wanted adults to be happy with me. I started screaming bloody murder and fighting with everything I had.
Yeah.
And it's easy from the outside to say, well, if you'd calm down, it might not hurt so bad. But I was fully as calm and relaxed as I could have been. And it wasn't as simple as, oh, I think I'm going to fight now. It literally was an uncontrollable reaction of fight or flight. Oh my gosh, I'm gonna die. This is so painful. I have to get out. I distinctly remember I don't know if it was a nurse or a tech or who, but they were physically holding me down. And I remember one of them, I just can't imagine ever saying this to a child who was in severe pain. One of them said to me, stop struggling. We do dozens of these every day. You are the worst patient we've ever had. If you don't stop struggling, we're going to strap you down and it's going to hurt. We're going to make it hurt way worse. And I screamed so loudly that my mom, who was fully locked out of the room, heard me down the hallway in the waiting area, started banging on the door, and threatened to break down the door if they didn't let her in. So they let her in, and she pulled me off the table and said, this is barbaric. And you got to remember, I had gone through 3 or 4 of these before, but my mom had never been allowed in the room, and in the past, it hadn't been as painful as it was this time, and I hadn't been as aware. The thing to keep in mind, they had given me deflux on the previous procedure, making the tubes smaller, and then they tried to use the same size catheter. So they tried to make a nickel fit through a dime hole. In my opinion, from research that I've seen, it shouldn't have been done. And the best part is, this made me so angry when I read the notes from this procedure. The doctor said, child showed signs of severe distress and anxiety. Mom would not let the test be performed. Need to reschedule. And my mom, of course, now realizing just how bad this was like, you are not getting anywhere near my daughter. There has to be another option. Leading on, eventually I went in for an exploratory surgery and they found that I had the extra ureter, which again was not diagnosed by any of the VCUGs. And they were able to basically suture it to another one and completely solve that issue. But now, of course, I have issues from the VCUG that I've realized over time, and especially since connecting with Unsilenced and talking to other women and realizing that this is a lot deeper than we think it is. I was diagnosed with multiple chronic illnesses, one of which can cause emotional dysregulation, can cause rage outbursts for no apparent reason, which I did contract around that time. We didn't know until years later. But I went from this sweet, outgoing, and I had my moments. I had an attitude, I'll be honest, but
Yeah.
much a people pleaser and sweet, very outgoing, would talk to anybody to the point where my parents were like, stop talking to people. After this period, I started having rage issues and emotional outbursts, became harder to control in a lot of ways, super shy, major stranger danger issues, to a point where my parents would go to introduce me to somebody and I would panic and hide behind them. My mom had trouble dropping me off at school. If I went to an after school program or anything, even the ones that I had loved before this, I fought her on it. It created some attachment issues. I think it did create a lot of distrust, but honestly, it created a lot of clinginess to my mom in particular.
Yeah. That is truly a horrifying story. And I think what's more horrifying is that I've heard so many similar pieces in other people's. It's like we're creating a mosaic or something. There's just a lot of common threads.
It's crazy. And there are so many pieces of the puzzle that are falling into place for me now. It's just crazy realizing that it probably is connected directly back to this.
Exactly. I think that was the most like damning moment for me around this time last year, was just having to piece together, like, yes, the VCUG and what that was, but then like all the childhood that came after. I also had that personality swap. I was also diagnosed with chronic illnesses, like I think as young as like 11. So a lot of stuff happens, and I feel like the world, and sometimes adults, well-meaning adults, can still find ways to invalidate and dismiss. And it kind of just perpetuates the problem until, now here we are, we're sitting down together having an interview, and it's just absolutely insane how far-reaching these impacts are.
Yeah, it was rough because I remember my mom always had the door open to talk about this. I probably talked to her about it maybe 3 times from when it happened to this year within the past 6 months. Each of the 3 times that we talked about it, she started answering questions, but was letting me ask so she didn't overwhelm me. And I started having full-on, thought I was having a heart attack, thought I was going to die, panic attacks.
Mm-hmm.
And was like, never mind, I don't really know.
Yeah.
And let me leave the room because I physically couldn't deal with it. It was, my body had a reaction to even just vague discussion about it.
I feel that on a whole other level. I did not know I had this, and when I was told, I felt the same. The way you described that was just on point. Like the bodily response, I felt like I was in a haze for the next like 3 hours. Like I just came to and I was driving on some back road I've never been on before, just screaming because I'm so, that's that feeling of being so violated and like there's nothing you can do. You just have to relive it in a way. I really hope more people will come to understand the gravity of those feelings. They're not something I wish on anybody. What has life with your family been like in the time since?
A little complicated. I have really great relationships with everybody in my family now.
Yeah.
Some of my rage outbursts and things, definitely the clinginess affected my family a lot because suddenly I went from drop me off anywhere and I'll have a good time to don't leave me, you can't leave me here. I know that a lot of the rage outbursts, the brunt force of them were caught by my family. Even if I was raging about something else, my family was the one who had to deal with it. Looking back, I see where I had those attachment issues of clinginess, and then also a little bit like I can't depend on somebody this much. Even in my childhood years, I would get really defensive, and I think it really affected me going from my childhood to my teen years. I needed to trust people so badly that I needed them to trust me back.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought, if in a weird way, like if they don't trust me, then I can't trust them. So it created a complication in my relationships with my family, particularly with my parents, if they were questioning me on something as if they weren't 100% sure that I was being honest, in a normal parent way, not in a bad way. for whatever reason in my brain, it connected. If they don't believe and trust me, how can I believe and trust them?
Yeah, that makes total sense. And that's actually something I greatly relate to, especially like you said, like when as a teenager, like teenage years were just literally the worst. I think I've never felt so trapped in my life. And when I was accused of lying, it was the same deal. And like you said, like our families have to pick up those pieces. Meanwhile, we're not getting answers we need to fix what's happening. So it's just one big mess.
And of course, obviously, going into your teen years as you hit puberty, that
Yeah.
is complicated in general.
Oh,
But
yeah.
add on top of that, you have this trauma that at the time I didn't understand and I didn't even acknowledge. So I knew it had happened, but for so many years, that line that nurse or tech had said to me of "you are the worst patient we've ever had" stuck with me, and I genuinely thought I was the problem. It's me. I'm the bad kid. Because of that, I think I was almost afraid to talk about it. I was so scared that somebody was going to tell me that it was my fault and that I was the problem. Not that my parents ever did that. They never acted like I was in that scenario. And the couple times that we had talked a little bit about it, my mom had said, I love you. I would never put you through that if I knew what I know now. I didn't fully understand because the doctors didn't explain it. Not in any way trying to excuse herself, but like most parents that have had their child go through this, I'm sure I know for a fact my parents have felt guilt about it. They are doing the best that they can with the information they have, but how do you not feel some kind of guilt or pain or something when you know your child is having issues from this? Going into my teen years, hitting puberty, when all my other girlfriends hit puberty, talks of pads and tampons and this and that, and I was an athlete at the time. Athletes have to use tampons. If I swim, I have to use a tampon, and that was not an option for me because of a lot of the trauma that was created from this test. It's crazy all the things that I can now connect back to this.
I know. I always compare it to like someone turned on a faucet in my head and it's just like been running this muddy water for like several months and it finally like slowed to a drip. And now I think we're just like getting closer and closer. It takes so much time and so much emotional labor, just like taking these little things and putting them where they go for real. I guess the beauty in that is understanding that you actually never were the problem and just being able to grieve like the loss of all you lost because you thought you were. It seems like a great transition if you want to maybe move into like vaginismus. I know you've had struggles with that.
Yeah, obviously I did not have a name for it at the time, but I
Of
have
course.
since found out that I do struggle with vaginismus, which is very boiled down is the involuntary contracting of your pelvic muscles and your pelvic floor. That is what I mentioned with the tampons. So again, I was an athlete. I lived in Florida, so I went to the beach a lot. It started becoming an issue where I kind of needed to be wearing a tampon and I physically couldn't. So it was explained to me how they worked. I had the pamphlet, I tried. I physically couldn't do it. There was nothing I could do. I tried it every way. I talked to like a couple of my girlfriends was like, how do you do it? Like, this is an
Yeah.
impossible thing. And nobody had an answer. Everybody was like, it's super easy. You just like try it and it works. Further on, it was actually when I was 18 or 19, I was finally able to use one. And I remember it because, awkward story here, I was so excited. I literally told my mom. I was like, Mom,
Aw.
I used this new mom for the first time. I was so excited because she knew that it had been a struggle. My parents have been very supportive of this, but my mom was really amazing. Even through her struggles with feeling guilty about this, she was the only person I could talk about it with. I say that I had gone to a couple of my girlfriends, but I didn't talk to them about this. You don't want to talk about this. What if they asked me a question and then I had to bring up the fact that I was the bad kid and I had this thing happen to me and it was all my fault?
And like you don't want to relive that every time you have a casual conversation. It takes so much
Yeah.
healing just to get to a point where you can talk about it.
Yeah, and the crazy thing with vaginismus is I got the tampon in, but then every time after that it was a battle, right? Because it's not just
Yeah.
do it once and suddenly you're cured. It almost became harder and worse because then I knew that it was possible, but I
Mhm.
didn't know what the magic combination of things to make it work and make it comfortable and so that I could actually do it. You hold a lot of shame about it. Other girls can do this and it's no big deal. Why is it such an issue for me? So I grew up as a Christian, which I am so grateful for, and I am a Christian to this day. But one thing that I do want to talk about is kind of the purity culture that I grew up in, This is something I have really only talked about with maybe one or two people, and it's hard to go into, but I do think it's an important part of my journey to share. I was looking around at the other girls my age when I hit my teen years, and I started understanding dating and marriage and the idea of sex. And when I realized I couldn't use a tampon, and even when I could use a tampon, I was looking around going, I was raised in a culture where I want to wait for my husband and only want to sleep with him, which again, I think that's a great thing to be raised in, as opposed to the crazy sexual culture that we're in now, mostly because I think it puts a lot of people, particularly young women, in danger, thinking that they are required to share more of themselves than they are. But the hard part was I had this test that I didn't understand, but I knew that I had been invaded in inappropriate spots. It made me feel like I had been violated.
Yeah.
And what man would ever want me? Like I was damaged goods. I didn't have anybody to talk to about it because I didn't want to talk to my parents about it. Not because the door wasn't open, but who wants to talk to their parents about it, you know? It's something I've struggled with to this day. It's been hard for me because since that test, once I started understanding, you know, intimacy and things, I felt like no Christian man would ever want me because I was damaged goods. And also, I had this idea that there's an expectation for the wedding night, and it's not going to happen with me because of these issues that I have. It created this really deep-seated feeling of violation, and like I'll never be whole again. But I do think that's something that needs to be acknowledged. And another part of that is we talk about it in our group of women who have gone through this procedure, but being told basically that it's okay sometimes for you to not have to give consent and for things to happen and for people to touch you in bad places. It basically sets you up for a high risk of sexual assault later in life. I have been very, very blessed that I have not had anything really terrible happen to me since. But I was in multiple situations where, by the grace of God, I was saved, because I don't know how I was not attacked. I have never spoken about this. I think one other person knows about this, but I was in young adulthood, was in a kind of a grooming situation. That's the only way to say it. It's crazy to look back and think I can track exactly how it happened and see where it literally just came down to me feeling like I didn't get a say. Something really bad could have happened, and I genuinely 100% know that it is because of the situation that happened to me with the VCUGs, and feeling like my autonomy, my voice is taken away, and I don't get to say no.
Yes. So well put. I really appreciate the way you said that. I also strongly believe 100% that these VCUGs, they do set you up for continued abuse. And I consider myself a living testament to that, in addition to the other women like yourself that I've been meeting and talking to. And it's so validating to at least understand that, you know, I'm not the stupid girl who got mixed up with domestic violence a bunch of times. Like, I'm not the stupid girl who kept going back. Like, I'm just the girl who didn't know she could say no.
It's so easy from the outside to say, why don't you just say no?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, sure. It's very easy when you're not in the situation. For me, it was incremental loss of power.
Yes.
Is the best way to say it.
Yeah. I mean, if I can speak outside the subject a little bit, I mean, that is just true for every woman alive right now. It seems like just a lot of violence against us, and we're not doing women any favors by putting them through this test, often unnecessarily and or cruelly, as is the case in your situation and others.
The craziest part for me is I had 4 to 5 of them done, and not one diagnosed me. Maybe if we can't get a diagnosis off the first or the second, maybe we shouldn't keep trying them repeatedly. If you do the same thing, what is the saying?
Oh,
Stupidity is doing the same thing over and over and hoping it doesn't ever fail.
Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly.
It's just crazy. I look back, and that's such a common thread that I've found with other women too, is like, I had X amount done, I had them annually, I had them this, I had them that. Like, why? And a lot of times they're called preventative. I know that it is common from statistics that women have them annually or biannually or semi, whatever it would be, multiple times a year, literally just to monitor when they're not having issues.
Exactly.
Why?
Yes.
It's crazy.
Yes. I was expecting to hear like 1 or 2 stories like that maybe, and that was enough to get me very, very, very angry. I'm already very angry, so that's saying a lot. But like, it is such a common thing. Like, I'm still beating my head against a wall, figuratively, just trying to figure this out. You cannot sit here and promote this test and sell this test and market this test as the gold standard because it's a diagnostic test. It's not treatment, you know, like it doesn't cure anything, it doesn't fix anything. It's imaging. That's it. The whole point of it is like, are we going to rule it in or rule it out? You know, so it just doesn't make any sense. I just can't imagine like the anger that you carry, having, you know, carried it myself, but only having had the one. I just can't imagine. It's unacceptable, inexcusable, and we're demanding some answers.
Absolutely, we are. Again, it was complicated for me because of my faith on top of it, because feeling like I was walking this tightrope of here's what my faith says, but also I feel like I can't live up to my faith because I've already been tainted, which is not true. Any woman out there is struggling with that is not true. It doesn't matter what has happened to you. It doesn't matter even the choices that you've made in life. You are not tainted. You are not impure. Nothing is wrong with you. You are perfect. I just wish that I could go back and hug 15, 16, 17, 18-year-old me when I first learned about other women having ramifications from this test. The anger of feeling like I struggled with this, thinking I was alone for so long, and it turns out I wasn't the problem. This is an unfortunately common thing, and I think in the next few years this is going to become the big thing. I think thousands more women are going to find out and come forward, because I've talked to women who are younger than me and women who are older than my parents who have gone through this. I'm thinking, how is this still happening? It's crazy.
That's exactly how it felt for me and for everyone else. And I have the same sentiment as well, like that gut feeling that we are far from the end. I mean, we've been talking about how it feels like we've just been like free falling through a rabbit hole, and we keep like waiting to like crash at the bottom so we can like figure out where we're at, what we're doing, and we're just still falling. And it's been almost a year. And so it does beg the question, how many other women are going to step up? Because from this end, I see it every day. I see it every single day. And so I genuinely hope that the word continues to get out and we can continue to offer support, because it sucks feeling alone.
It was pretty much right after we started the website for Unsilenced, and I was trying to get my medical records in order and typed in VCUG like all of us do, safe and effective. And so I added the word trauma to the back end of that, like so many other women have. That's how most of us have ended up here.
Yeah.
And because I thought maybe if one other person has had issues from it, it'll make me feel seen. And I fell down the rabbit hole. And I found those articles, the scientific articles of the studies where they have used kids who have gone through VCUGs as stand-in for child sexual assault, where they've compared it and shown that it causes the same trauma as that. Here's the part that I think you will probably relate to based on some of the things that we've talked about. My dad came over to my house. I was talking to him and I wasn't going to say anything, and it just came pouring out of me. And I was telling him, and I'm crying, and I was telling him about these studies that I found and the other women that I had found out there were other women who have gone through this. He was so kind, but I said to him, I'm going to send you some things. You don't have to read them. And I wrote him this long email, and I included all of the scientific studies and Unsilenced and a couple other resources. And I emailed them to him, and I said, you don't have to read this. I don't expect you to. It's terrible. I don't want you to have to read it. And my mom was talking to me a couple days later. She said, your dad came to me and said, why did she send me those articles? Does she think I wouldn't believe her? And it broke my heart because it had nothing to do with him, but there was this part of me that was so afraid that I wouldn't be taken seriously, which had nothing to do with history with him or with my mom. But I just wanted so badly for it to not seem like I was exaggerating that I felt the need to share those. And he felt so sad. He was so worried that I thought he wouldn't believe me. And so I went and talked to him, and he was like, I just want you to know I believed you from the moment you told me. You didn't I read the things, but you don't have to send me, you don't have to justify it. I believe you. The part that I think you'll relate to is feeling the need to justify yourself to make sure that no one will think that you're faking or you're lying or you're exaggerating.
100%. That is the most painful part. I feel like I can't speak for anyone but me, but yes, you know, and it comes from everywhere. It comes from everywhere. It hits you from all sides. It's social media, it's doctors, it's friends. Like I even have friends who I'll speak with and I just don't really feel seen and I don't really feel heard. And it always comes back to, well, how can you be sure that it's all connected? And it's like, why are you questioning that? You know, like in a way we're conditioned from a very young age to be like, I'm telling the truth. I know I'm a child. but I'm telling the truth, you know?
Not
Yeah.
lying, believe me.
Yeah, because what do you do if you're not believed? It's like that leaves you with almost nothing. Like what do you do? You can't really do anything, and that's such a place of despair to be lost in by yourself. I'm so glad you shared that with me and with us, whoever's watching this. But it's just such a moving, beautiful moment. I'm sure that kind of maybe like grounded you more with your family as well.
It did, because I had been justifying so many things in my brain related to this, and I finally didn't have to justify it anymore. First thing out of his mouth, do you need help? What can I do? And I'm so grateful for that, because I know that a lot of women who have had this procedure do not have that, and I do not take it for granted, and I am grateful for that.
Yeah, your story is it's very moving. And I really appreciate your perspective, especially because, like you said, a lot of these women have had very complex relationships with their parents, and not all of them have happy endings. And, like you, I feel very blessed to be on speaking terms with both my parents again at the same time, which hasn't happened a lot in my life. But that said, like this test can still have these impacts. I think your story speaks to that. It sounds like, you had two supportive parents and they believed you, but it was still so hard for you and it still impacted you. Like you still went through the same struggles. And I just want to highlight that in your testimony, just because I really want people to better understand that it just doesn't matter. It doesn't matter A, B, C, D. Like this test does damage, real damage.
It's hard to approach your parents if they were the ones who took you for the test,
Mm.
because you need to get it off your chest, but also you don't want them to feel guilty, or maybe sometimes you do want them to feel a little, at least have remorse. You just want to know that they understand the ramifications and that they aren't trying to justify it to you. It's hard. I remember when I did tell my parents about the research that I'd done in these studies, the first thing that I said to them was, I do not blame you. I hold no anger towards you, but I need you to know what I feel right now.
Yeah, that was very, very mature, if you don't mind me saying. That was just very mature of you, and I was very self-aware, and you're so right about like the automatic like guilt, and that's something we'd all feel because it's human nature, I feel like. But it is really hard to get past that initial barrier, and it's always going to be there. It doesn't really matter what relationship you had before, after, who cares? Like, you go through that with a parent. It's gonna alter your perspective and your feelings towards them, even if it's in an unconscious way. You mentioned you feel like you found your peace and you're ready to use your voice. What was it like to be in a Zoom room with other women for the first time?
Oh, I was crying. I
Yeah.
was crying because, again, it was for the first time I was in a room of people I didn't have to explain myself to. I didn't have to justify myself to them. I felt so seen and understood, and also heartbroken, because I thought,
Yeah.
how unfortunate is it that this is why we're all meeting? But
Yeah.
no, you're not alone. That was the thing that crushed me all these years, was feeling like I was completely alone.
Yeah.
It's crazy realizing the true ramifications of this test, because for years I have heard stories of children being sexually abused, and I knew that I had never been hurt by another person like that. But I remember, for whatever reason, relating to that and feeling understood in a way that I didn't with anything else. It would be like a true crime story or something, where somebody was kidnapped and attacked as a young child. And I remember relating to them in a weird way. And I felt crazy for that. And then when all of
Mm.
this came out and I realized the ramifications, I was like, well, no wonder, because I was looking at them going, different set of circumstances, same feeling. You're
Yes.
violated, you're helpless, you're being held down by adults. Like, it suddenly all made sense of why I felt, in a weird way, kind of a kinship to those stories. And now I realize it's because before I found you ladies, it was the only thing that made me feel seen. I remember right before I found Unsilenced, I heard a song by Marcus Mumford of Mumford and Sons, and it's called Cannibal. It's a hard listen. It talks about he was assaulted as a young child. And I remember hearing it, like I said, it was right before I found Unsilenced, right before I really dove into the VCUG and the
Yeah.
trauma from it. And I heard the song, and I didn't know what it was about, but I heard the first few lyrics, and it talks about his innocence being stolen by an adult. I remember where I was in my truck at a red light, and I just started crying, and I was like, why am I crying? And then right after that, I found Unsilenced, and I found out about the trauma from the BCUG, and was like, oh wow, it all makes sense, because in my head, I was relating that story of having something terrible done to you, and he talks about being about 6 years old. No wonder I had such a reaction to that. It's
Yeah.
a reflection of my story in a weird way. Something that I am literally just now within the last couple of months realizing is that I went the opposite way of a lot of women who have gone through some kind of trauma in their younger years, either childhood or teen years. A lot of women tend to be afraid of men or go away from men. I did the opposite. I started dressing more masculine and not in a gendered way, but just more masculine side of feminine. Baggy things, things that would cover up my body, things that would hide me. And my personality, I started leaning very heavily into the masculine elements and away from the femininity. There's nothing wrong with that, except when you are doing it for trauma that you haven't dealt with. So
Yeah.
I did the opposite of a lot of women who come out of trauma, and unconsciously, I basically went, if I just become friends with all the guys and they treat me like a guy and they look at me like I'm a guy and they're all my friends, maybe they won't hurt me and maybe they'll protect me next time. And not that it was just men in the room, there were women in the room too. It's just how my brain decided to cope with it. So as the
Yeah.
years went on, I went further into adulthood. That's what happened. I have always been a woman, but edging hard on the masculine side of being female. I consider it an armor. I was wearing an armor or a mask to present myself in a way that I felt was safer. Again, I felt like if I just acted like a man and was treated like a man and the other men looked at me almost like a man, then I would be safer. And I've always been a tomboy. I've always been rough and tumble and grew up in the country and worked with horses. And there's a lot of things that I do that are considered more traditionally masculine, which I love. And that is not something that I'm in any way ashamed of. But I want it to be because I love that side of myself and not because I am afraid or I'm allowing my trauma to change me. And my journey in the last few months has been rediscovering my femininity and finding that balance of I can be tough because I enjoy it and not as armor, but I can also be really feminine and love that side of myself.
I love that. It sounds like you almost got to like meet a new side of yourself. Like you get to rediscover yourself over and over and over. I read that in a quote recently on Pinterest, full disclosure, and it really moved me. And it sounds like that's kind of what you're doing. You're in the joy of rediscovering who you are. And that can be really hard and it can take a long time, but it can also be very beautiful and very like enriching in your life, I feel like.
I'm catching up on all the years that I missed out on things because of how I was portraying myself and for fear of people perceiving me incorrectly. Even things where people would make comments about me being a woman or me being feminine, and I would immediately, no, I'm a big tough guy.
Yeah.
And again, that's not a bad thing if you're doing it for the right reasons, and I wasn't. So now I'm finding that balance, and it's bringing me so much joy. And I have this new piece about me that I feel like for the first time, I'm getting to meet the woman who I was meant to be, and not the woman who this terrible trauma created.
Yeah, that was so well put. So many things running through my head just listening to you saying that. I'm so excited and happy that you have hit this point. It's never it's never easy to get to this point, you know? I consider it like the biggest compliment when my therapist tells me that. She's like, "Oh, you seem different. You look different." And it's like, "Thank you. I feel different."
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is. I've had multiple people tell me recently, you seem different, you look different, you're acting different. Like, thank you.
Thank you.
That's because I'm not responding out of trauma all the time. Fun fact.
It's amazing how much that clears up for you.
Yes.
Yeah. If you could share one thing with the healthcare community today with zero repercussions, zero consequences, but they had to listen to you and they had to take you seriously, what do you think you'd share with them?
I'd honestly probably ask them a question, and
Mhm.
that would be, why don't you believe your adult patients who were once your patients as children? Because honestly, it breaks my heart when I think you were my doctor as a child, and I'm coming to you as an adult, and not even out of anger. We sometimes come out of anger, but trying to say this to improve the community on both ends, right? Because
Mhm.
I look at it and I think this doesn't justify what the doctors and nurses and techs are doing, but they have to be blocking out their empathy to be in that room doing that to children. You can't, how could you, as an adult person, be willing to go into a room where you know you're going to be dealing with screaming, fighting children in pain all day, every day? And I'm fully aware that that is a fact in the medical community, that to save children's lives, you are going to have to do that at times. I understand that. I'm not downplaying that. But with things like this, where one, there are safer options, and by safer, I mean less traumatic, but also safer because they're not using the same level of radiation. The reason the parents aren't allowed in the room, usually, at least the reason they give you, is because there's too much radiation. If there's too much radiation for an adult to be in the room, how is that not too much radiation to be injecting into a child, especially right near their reproductive organs? Children are, I forget the statistic, but way more sensitive to radiation.
That's
10 times.
Pretty high.
It's insane. And obviously, I will never be able to prove this, but I have had hormone issues since I went through puberty. And I can't help but look back, and there's a little part of me that wonders, does that have anything to do with the fact? So I had 4 or 5 of them within a year.
Yeah.
Actually, I think it was within like 6 months, if I remember correctly. They say 1 is too much to have an adult in the room for. How can that not be too much for a child? Again, how are these doctors not looking at you going, it hasn't given us an answer. It has high levels of radiation. There are other options that we can do. Why would you not consider another option? Why would you continue to go, hey, parents, I know this hasn't worked before, but trust me, I'm your doctor and I'm an expert in my field. You should do it again. One more time, one more time, one more time. It's like, what? If parents knew what they know now, like my parents, I truly believe they would never have done this test if they knew what they know now, without even a shadow of a doubt in my mind. But it's not informed consent if you're not truly informing of the damage, and just covering your ears and going, la, 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 we're not going to listen to you, is not a reason to not inform people. You can't just sit there and act like you're deaf, blind, and mute and say, well, we don't know of any trauma. You know of trauma. We talk about it openly. And many of us women, I would be happy to go stand in front of the National Board of Pediatricians, doctors, literally anybody. I don't care. I will do it without vitriol in my voice. I will be kind, but I am fully willing to go and say, I'm patient number 1. If I have issues, other women have issues, and I can prove it.
I'm so fired up. I want to stand with you. When are you going? I'll get on a plane. Like, let's go. Seriously. I love that you bring up the fact that parents aren't allowed in the room. And it's like, well, why not? Well, the radiation, right? I believe my mom was like behind a barrier, which is interesting considering she was 7 months pregnant at the time.
What?
Exactly. Yeah, there's a lot of missing stuff in my story, but yeah, the other reason is, well, it'd be too traumatic to have you in the room. And it's like, well, which one is it? Is it the radiation? Is it the trauma that you claim not to know about? Which one is it? I'm genuinely asking.
Not that having the parent in the room will make everything better, but based on actual scientific studies, they have proven that a parent being in the room with the child in their lap, and they've even gone further than that and proven that the parent saying certain phrases to the child lowers the rate of trauma and discomfort hugely. And it comes down to simple things like, they said, don't tell your child it's going to be okay, because it makes them distrust you. And the biggest factor was if the parent could be in the room, particularly with the child's head on their lap, which is why I'm a big proponent of the other options, including drinkable contrast fluid, or even the one, I forget what it's called, but where they use the needle and they inject the dye directly into your bladder. I've done a lot of research on this subject.
Yeah.
The only factors that I've been able to figure out that make the doctors not use those 2 options, the contrast fluid takes extra time because you have to wait for it to get to the child's bladder. And it seems like the reason that they don't want to do the one with the injection where they put the needle in your bladder is because, this was what I read on multiple websites, medical websites, was because it takes such a skilled practitioner to be able to inject it into the bladder of a child. Let me just say, if you are not skilled enough to do that, should you really be shoving tubes up children? Even if you aren't doing that test, I want a doctor who's able to do that.
They should be. And this is a child. It's a child, you know? Like, it's so insane.
It's crazy because, and I know some people will go, well, it's a giant needle. Trust me, I have had many injections in my life. I was sick constantly as a child. I've had all the injections, IVs, all that stuff. If you had asked me and given me that option as a child, I have no doubt in my mind that if they had said, hey, would you rather get completely naked and we touch your genitals without a parent in the room, or we have a parent in the room and we use a needle that you will be fully numbed for and will only be able to feel a little bit, I would have chosen the needle every time.
Yeah. Like you said, there's a ton of studies to back that up. The other thing that struck me as odd, that still strikes me as odd, that is going to make for an interesting next several months at Unsilenced, I think, is the fact that CVIS is already established as the better alternative. It's completely radiation free. It's an
Yep.
ultrasound. It's $800 cheaper for families, and it is equally, if not more reliable than the VCUG. The only downside is the hospitals lose money. Despite the wealth of evidence that it's safer, better, less traumatic, it's still not being done. And we just got word, I don't know if you're interested, but a new study came out from a physician, and the study was about why we should not switch to CVIS ever, and the VCUG is gold standard forever, which sounds like hell to me. We requested this study, or a sample of it, because we're not paying that, and he sent the whole thing, page and a half, 2 pages. And his reasoning for that was because the doctors are burnt out and fatigued. They don't want to learn it. They don't want to do it. That's the stops they're pulling out in 2023, 33 years after they found out that it's traumatic. Yeah, it's mind-blowing. I just wanted to share that with you because you were on the right track.
I want to sit in the room with that man and just go walk me through your reasoning. So let me get this straight, right? You would like to just continue to perpetuate a very traumatic test that causes severe lifelong trauma in these patients because doctors don't want to learn the new one. Sir,
we have problems. So in terms of the long-term impacts on your life, what would you say those are like?
Obviously, I am just now within the past 6 months really starting to understand. You used the word grief or grieving earlier, and it really struck a note with me because the way I would describe it is I have been grieving for the child that I was, been grieving for the child that I could have been, and honestly grieving for the woman that I could have been. Part of the reason that I'm in such a good place now is because I felt a lot of anger at when I started realizing this is probably connected to that. This is probably connected, and this is why I did that. But I don't have any regrets because if the things that happened in my life hadn't happened, I wouldn't be who I am today. I'm obviously not grateful for the test, but I'm grateful for the woman that it has made me. Now I'm looking forward, going, how do I move forward with this? Medically, this has affected me hugely. I mentioned that I have multiple chronic diseases. Because of the interactions with doctors that I had when I was young, it did affect the way that I interacted with doctors as an adult when I was trying to get diagnosed and figure out what was causing all these crazy symptoms. My lab results were normal. I kept getting that answer, your lab results are normal. And I finally got so sick, I literally called my mom from across the state where I was living, and I said, Mom, I'm dying. No doctor can help me. I refuse to go to another doctor. I'm going to die alone in my apartment. I think a lot of that was because of distrust of doctors. I did actually, after that, she helped me find a doctor who is fantastic, who was able to run the correct tests and actually was able to diagnose me. It ended up being chronic Lyme disease, which, fun fact, not accepted in the wide medical community. And one of the co-infections, Bartonella, which is cat scratch fever, which I only bring up to say, it's also called trench fever. And they think that a lot of the soldiers coming out of Iraq that have severe PTSD with rage outbursts are actually infected with Bartonella, which is causing their emotional dysregulation and rages, which is what I brought up earlier about the rages as a kid, because I actually was infected when I was a child, but didn't know until the past 2 years I got diagnosed. Even though I have that doctor that I really trust, I am at a high risk for breast cancer. Both of my grandmothers had breast cancer in their lifetimes. That puts me at a very high risk. I cannot go to a screening for that or to any exams with a lady doctor, as I like to refer to them, because it makes them sound less scary.
Right.
I physically can't because even the idea of a mammogram, which obviously is of your chest, I can't even fathom going into a doctor for that and feeling vulnerable again. When I was meeting with the doctor who actually saved my life and diagnosed me with these other diseases that were shutting down my brain, he suggested doing a certain kind of treatment that was a little bit of an alternative treatment. I looked at him and had a full-on panic attack out of nowhere. I was fine, and I started yelling at him and having an absolute meltdown, and I left and went to the bathroom, and I'm like, why am I having a panic attack? And it was because what he had asked me, even though it wasn't anything related to the VCUG, it would require me to, I think, be in a hospital gown at one point and just the mere mention of that, I couldn't help it. I had a
Yeah.
complete panic attack and yelled at him and left the room and said, "That's never going to happen." And I came back and I said, after I calmed down, and I said, "I'm so sorry. I have this severe trauma." And of course, I didn't even really know or understand at the time. This was 2.5 years ago. I had to explain to him what had happened on top of not being able to go to doctors. And this is crazy to talk about publicly, but I do think it's an important thing to bring up. There are multiple reasons that I made this decision, including the chronic diseases that I have. Partly because of this test, I do not think that I will ever have children. A huge part of that is I cannot imagine going through all of the medical things, the tests, and giving birth and all of that, because even the thought of going to a wellness checkup while pregnant makes me want to sit in a corner in the fetal position, rock and cry. Like, it's this visceral, uncontrollable bodily reaction like we talked about earlier, and it's heartbreaking. And to have that taken away from you because of a trauma that could have been prevented if doctors had literally just read and acknowledged the literature that's been around since 1994 or earlier, I wouldn't be here. I had mine done in 2004 and 2005. So they
That was
literally
young.
knew 10 years just from one of the papers. There were multiple scientific studies that came out before I went in for mine.
It was
And
1990. So that was 15 years.
it's crazy and hard to talk about that, but like,
Yeah.
to look at this and go, I may never be able to fulfill what was my childhood dream of having kids,
Right?
it's really unfortunate, and it's hard, but I know a lot of other women can relate to that.
It has to be every interview I've done. I'll go ahead and say it. Every interview I've done. That's the consensus. I don't want kids. I mean, I do, but I can't. You know why? Trauma. I so validate you in that. And I also relate to your story so much. Just my mom also had breast cancer. I'm so physically adverse, and the pregnancy thing makes complete sense because the first time I got pregnant was when I found out about the test. It's like you said, you just wanted to curl up and just, curl up in a ball and just be done. And I was experiencing extreme angry outbursts, like rage when I was trying to mentally prepare for my first prenatal visit. I made them do the abdominal ultrasound first because I really didn't want to do it, and they ended up having to do it, and it turns out no heartbeats, but twins, but no heartbeats. And it's 2 weeks ago my babies were alive, and then I found out about the VCUG. I so validate the bodily stuff you're speaking of, the unfairness of it. It's not just that they took our childhoods. It's not just that they took our health. They took our dreams. They took the natural things for women to want, and they made it harder to find a partner and explain ourselves, and they made it harder to have sex, and it's a lot of stuff to unpack. And I'm really grateful that you shared that, because I do wish more people understood just how far-reaching this is. So.
Absolutely. And it's especially complicated because I do believe that it is a two-part trauma. It is very much perceived as a sexual trauma, but it is also perceived as a medical trauma, because it is both. And on the, people can say, well, it wasn't technically a sexual trauma because of this or that, but the truth is there's so many things that I could refute on that, but the biggest one is, as a child, children don't differentiate different areas of their genitals. It's genitals.
Yep, we're just told it's this private area. Don't let anyone touch you there,
Don't let anybody touch you or anything or look or anything like that. Yeah. On top of that, then you again have the medical thing of, it's how do I even go to a doctor? And on top of all of these other things, how do you go to a doctor even if they're not doing that, or even if you have to get certain procedures done or whatever, and say, hey, I need you to be a trauma-informed physician. Are you? Or no, you're not? Oh, I can't come to you because I know you're not going to treat me right. It really affects every part of you, and it can have nothing to do with it. Even, like I said, I remember viscerally my 12-year checkup, which is where they do the scoliosis check and everything, and I had to wear a gown, and I remember having a panic attack that day in the doctor's office, and I literally walked out of the room having a panic attack, asked the nurse, and said, do I have to get naked? I won't get naked. I will leave. And my mom's like, you can't leave. We didn't connect them until recently. That's why. And I was able to keep all my clothes on underneath. I literally, the doctor came in and I turned around and she was like, you're wearing all of your clothes? And I said, yes. She said, okay. And she made it work, which was a blessing. She was a fantastic physician. I'm so blessed that I was able to see her when I was a kid. It's just crazy, all of the things that it affects that
people don't think of. It's a very complex trauma.
Yeah, and you can apply it to any area of life, like definitely the medical sexual stuff. But like you said, the hospital gown, I hadn't even thought about that. You brought it up a few times. I'm like, absolutely. Someone hands me that, I'm like handing it back. Is there any other way? Like, is there any other way? Yeah, it's just like the vulnerability, the stuff that normal people can do at the physician's office that we can't. And, we get a lot of flack for that, which sucks. But yeah, I relate.
Well, and that's the funny thing funny in a terrible way about meeting the other people who've gone through this, because it's like, I relate to that. I know what you're talking. Oh my goodness, I never connected this to that. There have been so many moments through On Silence that people have said things and I went, oh wow.
Right.
That is why wow, it makes so much more sense now.
Yeah.
It's obviously unfortunate why we're here. I know we've said that, but damn, is it comforting to know that I'm not completely alone in the world with all of this. It's crazy.
What would you have to share with other survivors who are going through some of what you've gone through in the past? Maybe they just searched VCUG trauma on Google. What advice would you share with them?
Find an outlet, whatever that means for you. It can be something calming. It can be whatever. It can be art. Maybe you paint, maybe you pick up pottery, maybe it's literally just doodling, writing poetry, music, your story, writing a book, whatever it is, something athletic. It could be hiking. It could be go take up a kickboxing class. It doesn't matter, but find an outlet, because you are going to have huge emotions. And if you're first Googling it, you don't know the way the next few months are going to go. Everybody is different. I know for me, the first day, I was like, wow, this is a thing. The second day, I was like, I couldn't keep it in. And then it was a roller coaster from there on out, for literally months, where I would be fine for periods of time. And then I would be driving in my truck, listening to my favorite song with my windows down, having the time of my life. And it would just hit me, and the emotional realization of it all. And I would just start, weeping in my car. And I remember this one night in particular, I couldn't sleep. If you read historical documents, they'll talk about the weeping and the tearing of clothes, true mourning. I felt like that. I felt that one other time in my life before. I literally was sitting there mourning everything that had happened. I just don't even know where to start or how to deal with this. I feel so alone in the world. And I actually went onto the Reddit and literally just read other women's stories on the Reddit, and went and read the blogs again, because I just needed to feel not so alone. For me, I found weightlifting and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And remember, there's levels to everything. You don't have to go get a $150 gym membership to go weightlift. You can literally pick up a log and 2-gallon containers in your backyard. That's it. Like, it doesn't have to be anything. I used to work out with less than $100 worth of weights that I bought off Facebook Marketplace on my back patio of my apartment building. It's like my neighbors would see me walking down the stairs with my 2 little dumbbells to go do my weightlifting, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu literally saved my life in more ways than one. It brought a lot of this to light, because for anybody who doesn't know, it is a grappling sport. There's a lot more to it than that, but the basic version is it's a little bit like wrestling. It was so cathartic for me, because I was able to learn self-defense, but also just learning to be comfortable with physical touch from people that had nothing to do with sexual touch. Before, physical touch from a person, especially that I wasn't super, super comfortable with, was a no-go. It made me super uncomfortable, even just people standing too close to me. After doing 3 years of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, I'm like, I'm a hugger, come here. And again, I didn't even know that this was connected to the VCUG, but I got pinned under somebody, which happens. Very nice training partners, not anything bad happening. And I literally started having a panic attack. I didn't realize I was apparently struggling with some claustrophobia. Immediately they let me up. I excused myself, didn't even explain myself, just excused myself, left the entire gym, sat in my truck and calmed down. And I texted my coaches and said, hey, professors, I'm so sorry. I had a panic attack. I'm all good. But before I had even been able to text them, they had reached out to me and checked on me. So the point is, not that it has to be Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, but if you find something that gives you back your power the way Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu has for me, find your people and do it. And it can be a solo activity. I love art. I love songwriting. I love playing guitar. So I do that. That's cathartic. There's so many options, but any kind of contact sport, it makes you feel like you are strong and you have control over yourself. Even just the literal body control of knowing what to do with your hands. Find your outlet. Therapy is great, 100% supporting therapy, nothing against it, but it can't just be therapy or talking to somebody. You need to have something else that you can channel your emotions into.
Absolutely. And like there's even research on that, you know. Talk therapy has limits, basically.
Exactly. And there's obviously other options for therapy and everything, but I know for me, finding my outlets has been what's allowed me to start healing from this more than talking to any person. Although talking has been a big part of it too.
Yeah. Yeah, for me it's kind of like just a combination of things. Like I immediately gravitated towards the writing, just poems pouring out of me for the first time in years and years, you know, and you just kind of have to roll with it and feel what feels natural to you.